Sunday school leader. Hey, way before Huey Lewis and the News came up with that song about the power of love, the Apostle Peter knew about it too. In fact, we're going to be looking at that today, about how the power of love can affect our relationships in the church. Hey, we are continuing in our unit entitled Identity, My Life of Faith. This week we are in session 2. It's called Life in the Church, out of 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11. And the point of the lesson is that I love and serve Christ when I love and serve his body, the church. Now, as I look through this passage, I think we can break this down into 3 main points. The first being that we need to communicate with the head of the body. In verse 7, it tells us to be clear-minded and to be self-controlled so that you can pray. Now, this is an indication of the seriousness of prayer, not to be taken lightly, not to be taken for granted. And perhaps he's remembering the time when in the Garden of Gethsemane that they fell asleep while Jesus was praying, how they needed to be alert, sober-minded. Well, why? Why the urgency? Why the seriousness of prayer? Well, it tells us that at the beginning in verse 7. It says that the end of all things is near. Now, I think that's true on a personal level. I know at least as I get older, I realize the preciousness of life and the value of that, and how with each passing day I know that my end is one day closer. It's also true, I think, on a cosmic level that Jesus' return is closer than ever. Now, 2,000 years ago, they thought it was pretty close. Well, it's closer than that now. And that might lead to a question, why don't we know? Why didn't Jesus tell us why, exactly when he was coming back? Well, I think we know the answer to that. I like to think it's kind of like how we do our sign-ups at church, whether that's for church camp or a senior adult trip or whatever. Hardly anybody signs up until that last little bit. Then they all start signing up. And then after the deadline, people want to sign up. Can I go? Is there still room? And we gave you the deadline 2 months ago. What's wrong? Anyway, I think it would be like that. If Jesus gave us a date and said, I'm coming back here, people would lollygag around and not take life seriously until that last little bit. And then afterwards, kind of like banging on the ark after the door had been shut. All right. So when we are in communication with the head of the body, when we're in communication with God through prayer, urgent prayer, then I think we're better to go on to step number 2, which is to care for the body. We see that we are to love one another. He's talking about in the church here, to love each other, and that love covers a multitude of sins. Now, if you look at that word love, that's the agapao verb, or kind of like agape, the noun, agapao, meaning that godly, self-sacrificing love. Now, when it says that love covers a multitude of sins, it does not mean that it sugarcoats sins. It doesn't mean that it makes up for all the sins and you don't have to worry about it. There's no consequences. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Think of it like this. I know here's a phrase that I might use. My wife loves me, warts and all. Now, what does that mean? That means she loves me despite my faults, despite my sins, despite my shortcomings, because the love she has for me is so strong that it covers those things. Because we are to love each other as Christ loves us. And we are to forgive each other as Christ forgave us as well. In fact, that says that in Ephesians 4:32 and Colossians 3:13. Meaning, as we tie this into covering a multitude of sins, that if my brother or sister in church sins against me and hurts me, we need to work that out, and that my love for my fellow Christian, it's not going to gloss over that sin. It's not going to gloss over that hurt, but I'm going to be able to forgive and get on with life in the church. Okay, I think that's what that means. Also, not just loving for each other, but being hospitable, and not just being hospitable, but Peter puts in an interesting little phrase here that it's so appropriate. Be hospitable without complaining or without grumbling. That really hits home, because we can fake hospitality, and we can often complain. We can we can have them over to the house and be nice, but I'm going to have to clean for 2 days before they can come over. Okay, we can complain about being hospitable. Be hospitable without complaining. So the third thing we can do, I believe, looking at this passage, is serve the body. We can communicate with the head of the body. We can care for the body and then serve the body. 1 Peter chapter 4 is one of the 4 places that Scripture gives us a list of spiritual gifts. And there's only 2 broad categories here. Just briefly mention the other places, Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, and Ephesians 4, as well as 1 Peter 4. So it's easier for me. I need little tricks sometimes to help me remember things. So there's 2 chapter 12s and 2 4s, and 2 books that have first in them. So you got Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, 1 Peter 4. That's where the spiritual gifts are located. All right, so here in this section in our study here today, it talks about whether you speak or serve. And I think that's 2 broad categories. Whether you're speaking, you're out front, spokesman, more or less, of the church. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be the pastor, but that certainly is one of the offices. Or serve, whether you're behind the scenes. In the 21st century church, we have a variety of committees and positions and all this, and some of those are those out front positions that are seen, and so a lot of those are those behind the scenes people. And people gravitate toward those based on their giftedness as well as their personality. So just a thought here I think that ties in with this is that we are to do everything as unto the Lord, not just in our jobs, but in serving the church as well, which we can see in Colossians 3:23. So if you love Jesus, you should love his body as well. You should love the church. Okay, let me share with you what might be a crass illustration. So if this offends you, I apologize ahead of time. But to me, I think it helps illustrate people who use the church, who really aren't loving and involved. They're just using the church for what they can get out of it. So let's say there's a person in the church that says, I love Jesus, I love God with all my heart. But they come to church and they only use the church for what they can get out of it. They're not consistent givers financially. They've never served. They don't do anything. They're just there to get. There's a relationship. Perhaps they're even saved members of the church, but they're just using the church for what's best for them, what benefits them. I'm going to liken that to a man who says he loves his wife. Oh, I love my wife dearly. We've been married for X number of years. But he never puts anything into the relationship. He really doesn't care for her that much, but he does use her. He does use her for what he can get out of the relationship, and that is sexual gratification. Now, there again, my apologies if that offends you, but I think hopefully you see the comparison there, and I'm still debating whether I'm going to use that in my Sunday school class this week or not. But knowing my class, I can probably do that. Anyway, I think you see the relationship of there's a relationship between the man and the church, the man and his wife. He's using the church just for what he can get out of it. He's using his wife just for what he can get out of it. If some folks in our church saw that connection, saw the analogy there, it might be enough to kind of snap them out of their apathy. I don't know. Well, I guess I better end on that crass note. So, again, my apologies. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be with you next week.